Today, it's about not being the smartest person in the room. It's about really knowing what to ask, what are the right questions to ask, not necessarily knowing everything. I believe ability to be able to transform technology, I think it is actually given us a lot more things to think about and do or solve problems that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to. I think humans are pretty smart. Humans will figure out in terms of what is their role and how do we want to leverage that technology.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Navigating the Next, where we dive into the ideas shaping tomorrow with the people who are building it today. In this episode, we are joined by a technology leader who has not only witnessed but helped shape some of the biggest transformations in the tech industry. Meet Mr. Deepak Visweswaraiah, Senior Vice President and Managing Director at Pegasystems India. Before Pega, Mr. Deepak held senior roles at several global companies, leading large-scale R&D and digital transformation efforts. In his career of 30 years, including nearly 2 decades in the US, he has built and scaled high-performing engineering teams across industries, giving him a unique global perspective on technology and business. He also actively mentors startups and serves on advisory boards. In today's conversation, we'll explore what it means to lead through change, the real role of AI on work, and how we can build careers and organizations that are ready for what's next. Let's dive in. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We're truly honored to have you here. I've been looking forward to this conversation since a long time.
Praseedha, thank you for having me on here. Right, I think it's a pleasure to be here. I've been incredibly impressed with what I have seen today here and then talking to you guys. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job of being able to really nurture a set of people to be ready for the industry as they come through their education and stuff. So I'm incredibly happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So let's start with our first question. You began your career in diverse fields, starting from nuclear energy to gaming, semiconductors, and biotechnology too.
Yeah.
Long before starting with technology and IT. So across these shifts, how has your understanding of intelligence evolved? Especially today, as we see that generative AI is redefining what it means to think and reason.
Yeah, that's great question to start with, right? I think if you think about it in terms of, there's been one underlying common factor for me, even though there have been so many different, I think, starting with being able to work about writing software in nuclear power plants. Starting from there to be able to go through different domains, learn the domain expertise that you need. And really build products for different domains. It's been a phenomenal experience over the last 3.5 decades, what have you. To your question about in terms of what is intelligence, right? I think is also fundamentally I think that has evolved. Mainly because of the evolution of technology. I think, if you had asked me a few years ago, I would have probably given you a classic answer, right? It's about, critical thinking, problem solving, acing an exam, whatever, the thing might be. But I think that the whole advent of technology, especially generative AI coming into picture, has actually changed that definition, right? Today, the way I look at it is intelligence is probably, before I would say it is something that you have. Intelligence is something that you have, right? But today, it's about what you do. I think that's the fundamental difference. It's not what you have, but it's what you do. And to an extent in terms of, let's say, for example, you would, from an intelligence point of view, right? Today it's about not being the smartest person in the room. It's about really knowing, what to ask, what are the right questions to ask, not necessarily knowing everything. You're not the person who may, need to know all the answers, have all the answers. It's really about being, knowing what to ask. And how do you lead a team by asking the right questions, because you are not the smartest person. And there are smarter people, absolutely, today in the room, especially with the changing, the fast pace of changing technology, right? I think that's the fundamental difference that technology has brought together.
Absolutely amazing. So it's no longer about how much you know, but it's about what you do with what you know.
With what, yeah, exactly. What you do with what you know, and then how do you apply it to the most part, as far as that what you know, what does that give you? Yes, that 35 years of experience, does that give you the ability to be able to ask the right questions, to be able to extract the best things that you can actually extract out of a team? Right, and that's really more of the intelligence these days, rather than like, for example, I mean, today, your generative AI can do a lot of things. It can write poetry, it can write your summary, it can do a lot of things that you would want to do. But it's a question of getting it to do what the right thing is, for your business case, for your use case, for whatever you're trying to do, right? And I think that's kind of where it is leading towards.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. So you've led global teams of around 5,000 people at one point of time, with operations spanning across US, India, and Ireland.
Yeah.
I was very impressed when I got to know that from India, sitting in Bangalore, that you're leading teams from the West.
Yeah.
So with that scale of responsibility, you must have had a front row seat to the promise of technology and also the unintended consequences of it.
Yeah.
So according to you, what are the critical areas that leaders must watch out for when they're in the middle of technology that's rapidly evolving?
Yeah. Actually, great question, right? I mean, I think that comes from a lot of it comes from the experience that you build up. For me, in my own case, in terms of, like I said, starting with being able to work for nuclear power plants, where you learn what actually quality means, up front. You can't afford to write a line of code that hasn't been seen three different ways, to be deployed in a nuclear power plant. Right, and that kind of teaches you a little bit of what the level of detail you have to actually think through, and how do you go about designing or building for quality, when you write software, for that matter, right? Going from there to be able to, in my job at NetApp, where I actually played a GM role running a global business, actually, running out of India. I think there is one thing that I learned a very hard way, is that there is the it can be done. First thing that it taught me is the fact that it can actually be done, and it can be done provided you are willing to break anything that comes across as far as barriers, right? Sometimes it is often enough in that kind of a role, you would end up being at, sitting on a Zoom call at 1 a.m. in the night, or whatever time it takes. That's what you do. You sleep a couple of hours less every night. That's what you do. You end up having to travel, half the time, away from your family, what have you. But that's the price you pay for building success, in a way, in terms of. I think the key things are, it's not just about having the knowledge. Like we talked about in the previous question, it was all about intelligence, right? It's not just about having intelligence. That is not going to give you, all the things that you need to be able to be successful in a role like that, right? It's also about, knowing different cultures. For me, having spent about 18 to 20 years working in various multinational companies in the US, having been through part of my higher education programs, going through the university life and learning some of the ropes there, understanding some of the cultures, and building that ability to earn the trust and respect of people, right, in the Western Hemisphere or what have you, and taking the time to be able to build those relationships and earning that respect, I think makes a hell of a lot of difference when you have a role like that. Being able to look at all of those areas, I would say, is one of the fundamental aspects of leadership, to be able to play those global roles. Now, even through those things, right, you have to keep abreast of changes that are actually happening. When you are running, I mean, it is no different than, you would do it any part of the globe, because you are going through that transformation of technology as it evolves. And you're looking at, okay, whether, you are talking to your customers, you're talking to, the industry analysts, you're talking to all of those, all of those individuals who give you a perspective of what it is that you're supposed to be doing, or what should be your perspective of the outside in perspective of understanding what people are thinking about, and how do you go about building, products. I'm a big believer in terms of not necessarily, having having a technology and going to find a solution versus knowing a problem that you want to solve. That's fundamentally how I look at things. So I think from a leadership point of view, that would be my thought process.
So, like you said, you started your career in a very high stakes environment. So, did that experience shape what went later?
To a large extent, yes. Especially as I grew as an individual contributor, developing. A long time ago, probably, people don't code anymore. In C language, right? In terms of nowadays, it is a much higher level of languages like like Python and R and whatever else people use. But what some of the learnings that come to you stays for the rest of your life in terms of how do you build. If like the philosophy is, if you write 2 lines of code, those 2 lines better be the best 2 lines of the code that you wrote in your life, right? That's kind of how I learned the hard way, as far as even though I worked for a U.S. company, the customers that we were actually building the product for were Japanese, right? And Japanese were and have been very well known in terms of how quality is built into the products, and so that initial part of it for me to be able to learn some of that as my first job out of college in the U.S. And then getting to the industry, which was phenomenal for me, and which kind of stayed with me as I went through the first 9-10 years of my software development career, before I decided to try more on the management ladder of things, and then trying to learn some of the leadership ropes, if you will, in what we did.
So, from where you stand today, what should technology leaders pay more attention to or watch out for? What critical aspects, considering how fast technology is moving?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the fundamental thing is, one is that technology is moving at an incredibly fast pace. And to be honest with you, one of the things I think that has changed over time, and is not about how to do things. It's about how fast. I think that's what worries me, actually, to be honest with you. It's one of the things, like, if I were to say I lose sleep over something, it is about how fast, the technology is moving. Not because it is moving so fast, but it is about also, are we thinking about the implications of how fast that technology is moving, right? So are leaders really looking at all of the implications when they look at building something, if we are actually going and building something as far as a product goes, let's say, for example, Pega actually builds out a decisioning engine, AI-powered decisioning engine, which actually comes out and then makes decisions for people. We are known, to be one of the leaders in real-time interaction management, as Gartner calls it, right? And then, are we doing the right things in terms of moving at that pace? Are we thinking about the implications? Are we looking at in terms of, okay, if we go and did this, right, what are the implications of, are we considering any bias issues? Are we considering, auditability issues? Are we considering scale, repeatability, predictability kind of things, which is all fundamentally, important aspects of product development within software, when you develop software for that matter, right? I think the biggest concern for me is for people to be able to really look at that and understand to a large extent, do we understand the implications of what we're doing, and are we doing the right things, and asking those right questions as far as did we consider all of the things that we've done, right? I think those are some of the key aspects I would think that I would worry about for that matter.
Very, very critical and very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in this scenario, what changes are you most optimistic about?
Yeah, fundamentally, I am an optimist. I am that glass half full kind of person, right? And I believe this whole ability to be able to transform technology, I think it is actually given us a lot more things to think about and do or solve problems that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to. Like, I actually think about, let's say, the whole advent of AI, generative AI, the agentic AI capabilities that have come into Forex, and what we're doing with it, right? I fundamentally break down, let's say, the AI related, products or opportunities in probably two or three buckets, right? One, I would say, most people, when you ask them, talk to them about in terms of what do you want to do, they want to be able to do, oh, yes, I want to do this, but I want to do it faster, better, quicker, whatever, right? There is a story about Henry Ford when he wanted to actually really build the first automobile. He went and actually, asked a bunch of people, apparently, to understand, what people wanted. He wanted to understand, if you were to move from point A to point B, what would you really like, right? A lot of, I mean, the story is that actually he got a lot of people to say, I want faster horses. Right? People were used to, going in horses, and then they wanted faster horses to be able to make it, faster. But, that's not was his point, right? His vision was to actually build an automobile to be able to go there, which is in a completely different, transformed way of thinking, right? You don't want that. Yes, that's the first category of things where you can actually do things faster, better. Whatever you did, it's the same thing. It's probably a low-hanging fruit. Most people, it's like building a chatbot, right? Everyone says, oh, it is AI driven, but we've built chatbots for ages, for that matter. I think the second, kind of the order of things is where you can actually have a reasonable impact. In terms of doing things that actually exist today, and you can actually redo it in a different approach using AI, using generative AI, using agentic architectures. You can actually build it in a different way so that it has a higher level of impact. But I think most importantly, to me, what is given that the difference is the third aspect, which is transformational way of doing things. To be able to transform your legacy applications, to be able to transform the technology, things that you couldn't have otherwise thought of. Right? For example, let's say, there are companies that still actually have applications that were built 30, 40 years ago. They still have mainframes that are running that they actually have today, in operations. Now, would you actually take the time to, transformation, completely rebirth these things? They haven't done it in the last 30, 40 years. And why haven't they done it? Because it takes a hell of a lot to do it. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investment. And the business value may not be necessarily, paying off with respect to that. But I think AI has changed that perspective. AI has changed that perspective where you can now, you have the ability to be able to reimagine, rethink in terms of what that legacy application did, and do it in a much quicker fashion and get the outcome that you want, to be able to achieve that in a much shorter time frame. I'll give you an example in terms of a product that we came out with. It's called Pega Gen AI Blueprint. It's based on generative AI. It's based on two different fundamental aspects of things, right? One is it uses a large language model in being able to understand the concept of how do you take an idea to let's say a prototype, for example. And one is that. The second is it takes, Pega has been in the business for 40 years and have a lot of domain knowledge in some of the verticals that we have. And how do you marry the two together to be able to help reduce the time in terms of, especially in the discovery phase, where if you have an idea, how do you actually capture the idea? How do you figure out what requirements are, and how do you actually build a prototype without actually being a technical person? If you are a business person, how can you actually do this? And then you can actually collaborate, with an IT person to be able to build a quick prototype of understanding how this idea will actually work practically. When you want to run it for a set of users, right? I think that's the kind of power of that transformation you're able to see. I'm, incredibly optimistic. Going back, I think that is why I'm such an optimist in terms of looking at the opportunities. I think it gives us opportunities to rethink completely what some of the things that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Right? But it, of course, comes with the concerns. It's not like, there are no concerns. I talked about some of the things in terms of what leaders should think about, the implications of building some things like this, in an incredibly fast pace. So how do you make sure that what you do is transparent to users? How do you use the models, that give you the transparency? How do you leverage in terms of auditability, in terms of ability to provide the confidence to people in their comfort to use? How do you provide security, privacy, big concerns for people, today in terms of when they use large language models today? That's one of the biggest things we hear from our customers. And how do you provide that in your product so that they can actually be confident of using the technology that you produce? I know it was a long answer.
No, but you very clearly outlined everything that someone should think about. And it's just making sense to me that when we were talking earlier, you said, oh, these days no one needs to be a tech person. Now I finally understand what you mean.
It is true, right? To a large extent, it is democratizing technology.
Yes.
You don't have to, know. Like, for example, there are, we are in the business of, building a AI-driven, low-code platform. And we don't necessarily expect everyone to be hand coding. Do you want your, best architects to be spending time in terms of trying to, create the same dashboard, 15 times over? Probably not. You don't need to. I mean, they can actually worry more about building scalable, systems that do everything right, rather than doing mundane things, right? Yeah. And so it definitely helps. To that end, right? You don't have to be a deeply, technical person to do that part of, development, for that matter.
So you've been part of industries that have reinvented themselves more than once, maybe from automation to AI or data to cloud.
Yeah.
So Zooming out from where you stand now, what are the things that we are prepared well for in terms of this change?
Well, that's a hard one, in terms of being able to really, understand what are we prepared for, right? Well, I think, if fundamentally, humans have this ability. We've gone through shifts a lot before, right? People thought, when computers came, people thought, okay, everybody's job is gone. Essentially, people don't need to work, computers are going to do everything. But long behold, we know we've gone through decades of having computers do what we want them to do, right? People thought, okay, cloud is going to come, and everything is going to disappear to the cloud, and nobody will have control of software development. What have you? Humans have found ways to be able to do that. And of course, a lot of people think in terms of AI is going to take over the world, and most people are not going to have their jobs anymore. But you know what? I think humans are pretty smart. I believe humans, will figure out in terms of what is their role, and how do we want to leverage that technology. Is it going to change in terms of some of the roles that we play? Is it transformation? Absolutely, yes. I do believe it is going to, personally, I believe it's going to change the persona in most cases. It is going to change a mother's life, at home, in terms of how do I look at things, or what do I do, whether it is looking at from maybe a recipe, to be able to, how do my kids do homework, or whatever the case may be, right? Versus in terms of how do you apply these in your real day work environments, right? It doesn't matter whether you are a marketer, whether you are a salesperson, whether you are a software developer, whether you are an operations person. I think it is going to change the life of people in irrespective of what the persona is. But I'm not one of those who is actually saying it's going to replace all of them, right? It's going to change them in terms of, in a way that people can do things better, right? And I think that's what we need to be prepared for, right? To be able to adapt. And I think humans are pretty smart in being able to do those kind of things, right? I will give you a practical example. I was very recently working with a legal team, right? And we were leveraging this whole, we were talking about and testing out a way where, how can you summarize, I don't want to go read a whole legal contract. How long, how much can I understand, the legal jargon? I'm a technology person for that matter, right? So we can get AI to generate a nice summary, and then you can read and you can understand the most valuable parts or important parts, and then you're good. But I it was very interesting. One of the people in the team actually kind of thought out of the box. And why don't we reverse this whole thing, right? In
Okay.
the sense that I'm actually going to give what I want as the outcome, or the contract in itself, right? And the outcome of the contract, I'm going to feed that to the large language model and say, can you write the contract for me? Completely the reverse of what I mean. This is really transforming the what the legal team would do, right?
Yes.
The legal team actually goes from the clauses to the outcome, and then here it is kind of reversing the whole thing. So to that end, so what do we what do we prepare for, right? I think it is to be able to prepare for this kind of transformation. At the same time, in terms of not to be afraid of this change. You're going to actually experience this change one way or another, right? If you don't do it, somebody else will, kind of thing, right? That's typically what happens. And it's our ability to be able to think through, and how do we adapt to some of these changes. I think the biggest quality that people can actually have is about that adaptability. the ability to be able to adapt to the newer ways of doing things, be able to understand the context of the changes that are happening, and how do I leverage that to the business outcome that I would want to be able to drive. Right at the end of the day, you want to focus on the outcome. That the how the teams typically will figure out as far as how do we get there. So even though there is impact, I'm fundamentally of the opinion in terms of yes, humans will actually figure out what those are, and then we need to be flexible and adaptable to the changes that are actually happening. And then how can we do what we do better, and then how can we figure out? I'll give you another example. Very recently, right, in terms of there was a creative team that was building a short documentary kind of movie that they were they did everything with AI,
Yes.
right? And they did it in a week. Okay. Now, what did they? Did they actually lay off the complete creative team? Of course not, because they could actually do a number of other things with that team to be able to do all the other heavy lifting they needed to do in order to produce that creative and be able to take it to market faster. That's what you can actually do, and be prepared for.
So leave everything that's possible with AI to AI and focus on the things that you can do better.
I think it is going to give us the ability to think about the art of possibilities. It
Art of
is, yeah.
possibilities.
I think that is the
Yeah.
key thing, right? In terms of, I think that's also the change. Things that you couldn't do before.
Yes.
Right? This thinking through the art of possibilities will actually give you some ideas of what you can actually do and how you can actually do that much faster.
I'm going to remember this
Yeah.
art of possibilities. Okay. So, in this aspect, do you think there's any long term blind spot that we're missing out and we should be paying attention to?
Anytime technology moves very fast, right, there is always this concern about what are we missing, right? And that's the one I talked about earlier. If there is one thing I worry about, the one thing that I lose sleep over, it's actually that concern, right? What are the long-term implications? What are those blind spots in terms of so if we are using, let's say, the latest technologies to build something, are we making sure that are we making sure that we are doing it in the sense that that removes things in terms of bias, for example, right? If you are using an AI model, if you're building technology around it, or are you doing it the right way? Are you taking care of your ability to be able to, like I said, for example, the transparency. Do people know why it is doing what it is doing? Right. A lot of the things in terms of thinking about how close is it to humans, for example, right? How do you think through that part of it and still have a human element? I strongly believe there should be a human element in terms of the decisions that are made through these processes. So I think longer term, it's always good to think about how you make sure that you are thinking from a longer term perspective to provide those. Very recently I was working with a startup. One of the things I enjoy doing is to be able to advise a few startups in my spare time over the weekends or what have you. I enjoy doing that. One of the companies working in the mental health area, which is a phenomenal space to be in, and they were building this product to be able to engage in conversations in a chat conversation, in being able to provide assistance to people where it is required, right? And at times the challenge was the bot necessarily wouldn't understand the mental state of a person and would actually respond back in a way that is, I would say, in a nice way, that you wouldn't desire not a desirable response, if you will, from anyone, right? It would actually show very clearly that it is biased, and essentially the team that is working on realized this fact about, they just didn't ignore it and then move on. Right, the thing that I'm actually very optimistic about and very happy about is also the reverse thing, right? The longer term concern that we talked about, but also people doing the right things. I love the fact that the team zoomed out, looked at the fact that, okay, there is something wrong here, especially in the field that they are actually in. It's not desirable to move forward as is, and took a step back to be able to think through in terms of what we should do about it to be able to solve the problem, from that perspective, to ensure there is no bias, to ensure that we understand why the model actually behaves the way it does, given the right data to be trained for the model, right? And then how they would actually go about it before it goes into the market, to be tested, live, for example, right? So those are fundamental things that I would worry about in the longer term, making sure that we are understanding as far as how are we using this technology, for what are we using technology, are we really generating the outcome that we want to, and doing all of this in a way that is ethically, safe and secure, that actually considers data privacy, and security aspects of things, and building it holistically, right? You don't want to be in a rat race in terms of who does what faster, right? In the longer term, I think the best solution wins. It's not always the fastest solution that actually wins. We've seen a number of examples of how necessarily always the first mover advantage doesn't necessarily work, right? So it's not just about running how fast you can. So what I'm saying is that longer term thinking is very, very useful.
Thank you so much for sharing your optimism along with your experience.
I think it is important to act, to be optimistic, to be honest with you, right? I think life becomes a lot more easier. At least this is my perspective, right? My personal perspective. I think actually, life becomes easier if you have an optimistic view of everything. I think if you get up in the morning and be optimistic about what you can get done that day, you can actually have a smile on your face and go get things done, right? And what I've seen is the reverse side of it is in terms of, if there is pessimism in your mind, you're always thinking about in terms of I also refer to it as the victim mindset, right? In terms of, oh my God, this happens to me all the time, and why am I in this situation? You're not necessarily really trying to get things done. You're actually sitting and moaning about what has happened to me, and that can kind of really take you into a downward spiral of not being able to really achieve things. It's just my opinion in the sense that optimism to me, in my own experience, always gives me the ability to really go get things done. It gives me that energy. It gives me that opportunity to go get things done.
Powerful insight, actually. I mean, people usually think of optimism, pessimism as opinions or somebody's perspective of things.
Yeah.
But from what you've said, I think it also largely affects the attitude that you face life with.
It does, right? I think it does give people also an opportunity of not necessarily thinking about themselves and blaming themselves for everything, right? There are things that happen. Things do happen for a reason, whatever the case may be, and it may be a person's fault for that matter, right? But the point is also in terms of do people have an opportunity to learn from things? I think being an optimist gives me an opportunity to fail. And, by failure, I actually learned something. And now I know, I've learned something from doing this, and I can actually apply it. Yes, I would be a little mad if I keep failing on the same thing, and not learning from it. But I think being optimist is also something that gives me an opportunity to learn some things and apply that and move on, to newer things.
So, innovation is exciting, but execution is hard. You
Yeah.
must have seen this in your experience of managing large teams over the years. So, in your experience, what is the quality or what is it that separates teams that can bring those ideas to life and from the teams that get stuck in dreaming big?
Um, that's a great question. I think you will see this happen very often in a lot of companies, right? I mean, we all pride about innovation. There is nothing, there is no doubt about it. There is nothing wrong with it. Innovation is not only exciting, but to an extent, I'm a huge believer in terms of innovation, right? I mean, that's what I kind of live for and strive for. Innovation can be so much so as I would say, it can, it can actually be intoxicating in a way, right? That's the level of which, that's
Yes.
how it works. But, everybody wants to innovate. But you can't innovate for the sake of innovation, right? Innovation has to be driven with a purpose in my mind. I'll tell you a story when I first learned about innovation in my early career, where when I really learned about how do I become a leader from an individual contributor, what actually changed my perspective of I think a long time ago. This was right, and I and my team, we were working on some great technology. We were building a fantastic piece of technology, and we actually spent good amount of time and we built it, and we were very thrilled, very proud of it. We wanted to show it off, and we called a meeting. We asked the product leader, the business leader to come in, and we actually did a demo of what we had built. To my shock, the product owner, the product leader, who actually is looking at this from a business perspective, from a company point of view, right? Said, "This is cool stuff. This is great, but what am I going to do with this?" Right? I mean, none of my customers are asking for it. So what you built is great, but it's useless essentially, right? I mean, that kind of hit me hard. That kind of gave me a lesson in my life, that I probably will never forget. In terms of, it is not about just being able to build cool stuff, um, and then go look at what problem do I solve. But I think you have to be in the mindset of, if you're innovating, you're actually solving a problem, and understand the problem you're actually solving and innovate to solve the problem, not necessarily innovate and go find the problem to solve afterwards, right? I think that's the fundamental difference in terms of, if you will. And that story stuck with me for for forever. And in fact, after that, um, I actually started sitting on customer calls. I actually started sitting to be able to understand what is the business perspective. So much so that I decided to actually go do an MBA. I left my job. I went and did an MBA, to be able to understand what that business perspective is really all about. How do you go about? I came back a little wiser, I guess, and and then came back to the industry, from that perspective, and I think that is given a way of thinking in terms of, when you actually innovate. Innovation is actually great. It's not about just being able to go file patents. It's not about just being able to build cool stuff. It's about what problem are you solving, right? Fundamentally, I would say, if you're innovating, you know, figure out what problem you're solving. Am I actually solving the right problems? And is that, what is the outcome of it? And then how do I go about, innovating to solve the problem?
Makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah. It reminds me of a book I've read. It's a Japanese philosophy called Ikigai.
Yeah.
So you're not only supposed to get happiness from what you're good at or what gives you joy, but it should be useful.
Yeah.
Only if these three meet, then it's your purpose. Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, which also makes sense, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of a circle, if you will. In the, yes, you actually build something, you're innovating for this thing, and you're actually solving a problem through which somebody is actually satisfied about, receiving that service, or whoever is using your product, whatever it is, and then in the bargain, actually, you are building a business with a sound approach of solving the right problem. Right. I think fundamentally that adds up.
So, what I'm gathering is when you actually find value for what you're building, that gives you the drive to go from innovation to bringing it to life.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you summarized it very well.
Thank
You see?
you. All
Yeah.
right. How do you personally balance vision and execution as a leader?
Yeah, I think we probably missed this part in the earlier question, right? In terms of teams focusing on innovation and what does execution and mean. To me as a leader, what I've actually seen, even in practical situations, is that if you have only one of them, either one is essentially useless, right? You can actually have innovation or your strategy all thought up, and if you don't have a team to execute, it just sits there. And if you have a team that can execute, but you have no vision and really how to go about doing things, what are the right questions or what are the right problems to solve, and that vision isn't there, you really are left with nothing. And so it is very important. It's incredibly important to have a balance of this vision and execution aspects of things in an organization. And it may not be the same person, right? which is which
Yes.
is which is perfectly fine, right? I may be good, I may be a good visionary, but I may not really know how to turn this vision into an execution and being able to get it out to the market. As long as I have a team that complements me very well in being able to, one, understand the vision, break the vision down into really the elements in terms of actionable, elements that can be translated to an execution, and then you have a team that can work well together to be able to execute. And so that balance, I believe, is incredibly important. One or the other really doesn't, give you that success that you're looking for, right? I think a lot of leaders will tell you that, it's as far as just being one or the other doesn't help, and you need both. You need both to be successful.
Brilliant. So, Gen AI is often described as domain agnostic, meaning it can impact almost any industry.
True.
So, from what you've
True.
seen, what are some unexpected or surprising ways that it is changing workflows or even human behavior in certain aspects? What has been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I do believe, I've talked about this a lot, isn't it, in terms of generative AI being pretty domain agnostic, right? For example, it doesn't matter whether you are in the education industry like you guys are. It's transformed ability to be able to actually, create content, and how much of that you can actually do, versus whether it is, let's say, healthcare. It is actually transforming healthcare. It's not just about ability to be able to provide doctors with this thing. One of the funny things I actually came across was how with a how generative AI can actually help in the healthcare industry, not necessarily like the doctors or the nurses or what have you. What I saw, was a way for, let's say, whatever it is in the, from a, let's say if a patient is admitted to a hospital, and they go through the whole day of whatever tests, whatever things that they are admitted for, whatever procedures, whatever the case may be, and it's all logged into their system, right? at the end of the day, they used generative AI, model to be able to produce a summary, in plain English, right? So you don't have to, and that summary was actually given to the patient's, caregiver, like a parent or whatever, right? It is great for me to actually read a summary of the day in the life of a patient in the hospital, and then not be a doctor or a nurse to understand what actually it means. Right? It's written in plain language, English language. I can actually read and understand and get a summary without having to be a doctor, for that matter, right? So, which I thought was fantastic.
It is.
Yeah, and similarly, in terms of if you think about in the financial industry, for that matter, right? Today you need to be an accountant or somebody like that. You want to be able to, you need to be able to, be an Excel jockey. You want to be able to understand PDF reports. You have to be, an expert at doing all of that to figure out, what is my portfolio doing. Now you can actually give that all of information to a large language model to understand in terms of, hey, give me the state of my money in terms of what it is doing for me, right? Or how is it performing? So there are, nuances, like that. What is surprising is the ability to be able to use the technology to be able to do these things, right? I mean, what is, I think your question is also what is, what is the, I'm not sure if I understood correctly.
Unexpected or overlooked ways.
Yeah, the unexpected, the kind of things, in a way we talked about blind spots before.
Yes.
It is very similar to in terms of, are we solving the right problems? Are we, when doing those, are we taking care of things in terms of from a longer term perspective? When we do these things, do we care about the biases? Do we care about, security? Do we care about auditability, the transparency of the models, and those kind of things? I think if we can keep those things, it'll keep surprises to a minimum.
Yeah.
But having said that, I thought, some of these use cases are phenomenal. I think they are completely industry agnostic. Irrespective of what industry you're in, I think you're actually going to see an impact of how how you can actually leverage to an extent in terms of, leveraging it in a field like agriculture, for that matter. How do you look at, I recently came across a startup that's actually working in the agri, field, in being able to help, help farmers in terms of figuring out the right time, and when to, sow the seeds, what to do, all of that stuff. And that is actually being done a lot. What was unique about this company that did it was that they actually localized their application to regional languages, which is a fantastic thing from an India perspective, right?
Yes.
Those kind of innovations actually take things a long way. I mean, those are the kind of the surprise, factors that you will actually see in from an innovation perspective. That is solving a problem. How do you go to some corner of one of our states and speak their language and give them their ability to be able to understand what you're trying to do, and then help them in their cause, right? I mean, that's fantastic.
There's a lot of talk these days about AI taking over knowledge work.
Yeah.
A lot of talk about AI taking over knowledge work, whether it is about writing or thinking or doing research or anything like that for that matter. Have you seen any examples, maybe at Pega or somewhere else, where this is already happening by a large extent?
Um, yes and no. Right? Will knowledge workers be impacted? Absolutely. I think there will be an impact. There is already an impact in terms of ability to be able to, for technology, for AI, to be able to, do some of the things that that knowledge workers, as we so call, would do. But is that taking away knowledge workers? No, I don't think so. I think it is actually allowing people to, focus on being able to do things, that are that require more of our human skills in terms of reasoning, in terms of ability to look at larger problems. How do we solve those larger problems, and what we do. There are multiple examples, like that. For example, I was talking about a creative team that did this documentary, and that they created this movie, right? That's a perfect example of a knowledge working team that actually had an impact in terms of what actually they themselves saw the impact of how do I take the help of this technology to do a lot of things that I would do. But what it allowed them to do is to really, do other things in terms. So those are not a single person was actually impacted. I'll give you an example in terms of whom we worked with, in an insurance firm, for example, right? They actually had a set of, an insurance group that processed claims,
Okay.
insurance claims. People claim, and then they saw. So this team actually was the front-ending team for all of the insurance claims that came in, and they would triage these insurance claims. And their job was, pretty mundane, you would think, right? I mean, they would have to read through the insurance claims forms that, comes to them. They would categorize them and understand whether something is fraud, whether something is genuine, whether something has a probability, is it a straightforward case, whatever the case may be, right? And they implemented this technology in terms of having the ability to be able to read these forms and automatically categorize them, to be able to categorize and assign it to the right adjudicators, or would have you different personas, being able to that reduce the time significantly. What they would have taken, hours, to be able to do happened in minutes, right? So, but what they did was they took all of these people, and then they actually started doing different things, in the sense that now they increased their customer interaction, to be able to actually have an interaction with the customer, educating them about the policy benefits, educating them about in terms of their benefits, and why they should actually be doing what they're doing, and then or in terms of the after effects of processing a claim, and how do you provide the benefits to them, or whatever you. They actually went through in terms of leveraging that set of people, to be able to actually build a better business. And in fact, their customer satisfaction went up much higher. Their ability to grow the business was actually faster. They actually turned around their timings, in terms of their SLAs, became better. So there are a lot of such examples that you see in the industry, where knowledge workers are actually taking the help of technology to do things better that they would have done. At the same time, they look to be able to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have done. So it actually impacts the business better, right? They can cause that better. Within, even from, I spoke about, let's say, Pegasystems Blueprint earlier, right, as a tool that someone can capture idea all the way to be able to build a prototype, right? Historically, I would probably say that phase in our, for example, that's a Pega product, right? And our customers would have probably taken 3 to 4 months to be able to really go through that process. Now, with the help of, let's say, Blueprint as a product, they can actually do those things in less than 2 weeks. And then we can leverage our resources to be able to do so many other things, to help our business, rather than doing taking 4 months to be able to generate a prototype.
I'll probably be asking you to repeat yourself.
Yeah.
But if what would be your advice for individuals who are at the risk of um, losing their jobs to AI?
Yeah. Well, I think it is about changing the mindset, right? I think life is all about learning and your ability to succeed in your role, or over time, in your experience, it's something that depends on how often do you learn. For example, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, if I coded software in C language, today nobody wants that skill set, right? So you have to really educate yourself, to be able to do that. So one thing is about being able to have that ability to learn, ability to continue to build, and evolve with the change that is going on. Secondly, move away from what we talked about as far as um, doing what you're told to asking the right questions. I think if you start asking the right questions in the room, you become better in terms of to be able to understand why are you building what you're building. And a person actually, if they know, why am I building this software? It's not about because I'm told to.
Yeah.
It's because this customer is trying to solve this problem, and what I'm doing will actually help solve that problem. So I really know why I'm building, and I can do a better job of what I build. Right? Those,
Thinking in outcomes that you all
very
already said.
much, right? Yeah, thinking outcome makes a huge difference in terms of what I would actually tell people to do.
Looking at your own journey, you kept reinventing yourself as you moved through these domains and as you kept growing in your career. So that doesn't happen without a huge commitment to learning. So, how do you think leaders or any individuals for that matter make it a priority and daily practice
Yeah.
to learn and update their knowledge in themselves?
I think not just me. I think most people who actually last a long time in the industry have to go through that learning. You have to have that mindset of continuous learning, right? It is not about being able to it's not about just books, in my view, right? To me, I think the continuous learning comes from practical implementation of learning on the job. I think that is the hardest way I have learned, starting from my first job, as far as how I learned what quality actually means, or how to build really sound software in terms of in mission critical applications or what have you, to where I am today. As far as I think there is a constant constant desire to learn new things and apply new things to your practical solutions. The thing is, in terms of most companies will actually have a learning program. Okay.
Yeah.
They will actually make individuals go through, whether it is soft skills, there is a set of skills that you learn, then there are certain other aspects of things that you technical skills that you actually go through. um, it's so humans are not machines, right? To an extent, although a lot, we do a lot of things like machines do, but at the end of the day, I think that the learning part of it, to me personally, comes a lot from the applications of it, applications of things that I've learned. I think you know if I if I learned something new, and if I didn't really apply it anywhere in for 6 months, I probably don't remember any of it. You know, to be honest with you, today, if you ask me how much of things I studied in my 4-year engineering, ages ago, I probably remember 10% of whatever I read at that point. But what I've learned from there, to be able to apply in real life, I think makes a huge difference. So my biggest thinking or advice as far as continuous learning goes, it's not about making the time in your calendar to go learn something new. That is good, but if you don't apply it, it's almost useless. Finding the time to apply what you're trying to read or learn, I think is very important. So my focus in terms of in organizations like ourselves, where we focus on, yes, somebody might want to learn something cool, that's okay, but can you actually give them opportunities to be able to apply those learnings? And how do you apply those learnings? And as you need something to be learned, can you provide that opportunity in terms of the education or learning platforms that exist, to give them that opportunity, right? I think the biggest thing in my mind is about the practicality and the real life learning, rather than necessarily textbooks that you can actually go to. Yes, there are, I do spend good amount of time reading, whether it is articles, most of the time it is late night articles that you would read in trying to catch up with everything that's going on. But you pick and choose what you want to learn, and how do you put that into practice, and what makes a difference for you and your team, to really practice something. I think that's the key thing I would probably say.
Yeah. It's not about what's good or what's trending, but what's useful to you.
Correct. And no, what's useful to you, and also to your organization, to an extent. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And can you actually really practice it too, right? If you don't practice it, it becomes purely
hobby.
learning. Yeah, just a hobby. Exactly. That's the right word. Yeah.
There's a lot of debate right now on whether AI should be regulated.
Yeah.
So, what is your viewpoint, and how do you think we should do it without slowing down progress?
Yeah. It's a tough question. It's a double-edged sword. My biggest worry in regulate, the short answer is yes. Okay. But the long answer is, yes, but we have to do it carefully. Right? The biggest worry I would have in regulating AI, is really stifling the innovation. The minute it if the regulations come into picture, and the government is the only body that is involved in putting all kinds of restrictions on, and it actually, I personally believe that it may really stifle innovation, and then really slow things down, and won't give us the opportunity to really be the leaders in the market, for that matter, right? I personally believe that regulation is required, but it's required from being able to implement that from different players, right? I think the right, policymakers need to be involved. It should be more of a guideline than necessarily, a restriction, right? Establish the standards that we want to adhere to. Get people to agree on what are those standards, and how we go about maintaining those standards. How do we make sure that we don't have biases in the models that we generate? How do we make sure that the models are trained with the right data to be able to remove any of those biases? How do we provide the transparency of the models in terms of what they're doing? How do we provide the confidence in terms of the safety and the security built into these models? How do we make sure that we don't compromise anything with respect to data privacy, in terms of any private information that is available, PII, what have you? How do we make sure that there are regulated industries like financial industry, and how do they use to give them the ability to be able to provide auditability of everything that happens, from a regulation perspective, what have you, right? I mean, all of those come into picture. That's why I said my longer answer is yes, but we have to do it carefully.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing would be to really put a regulation in place that stalls everything, that stalls innovation, that delays the pace of change that we are experiencing today. If we can actually come up with a set of standards that everybody agrees on, what the right teams actually kind of do the right, agree to it, and that is actually managed in a way that industry doesn't suffer, I think would be the ideal thing to do.
For a young developer or a data scientist who's preparing to enter the job market in a world where there is a risk of AI taking over their core functions, what's your advice?
Well, I think we talked about it a little bit in terms of AI having pretty much impacting every persona. So I don't think it is anything different to that end, right? I think there is a lot for them to do rather than worry about is AI taking over what I would do as a data scientist or what have you. In fact, actually, data scientists have a pretty good role in terms of how AI is implemented in an organization or how it is leveraged and what models do they use and what research do they do. Typically, the data scientists, actually, we have quite a few of them in terms of really looking at how do you apply a model to a problem that we are trying to solve. And how do you experiment with it? How do you ensure that the data that we use is clean enough? And to be able to really applying that model into the right problems that we are solving. Again, I think I would rely back on what I said as far as thinking about what problems are we solving, than necessarily worrying about in terms of is my job going to go away. Some of their job is going to become simpler. I think people need to understand and internalize that yes, I can actually do what I did better. So what can I do with my time, right?
I love that reframing. It's going to get simple.
It is going to get simpler. I think that is the best way to look at it. That is an optimist way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And then the thing is in terms of I can actually do something better, and I can learn new things. I can apply some new techniques in terms of what we can use it for, and what have you. I think it's just evolving with the technology.
What do you think are the biggest misconceptions about AI in enterprises, especially among non-technical folks?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think the last part of it, I think, is key too, right? I think a lot, the biggest misconception, I think, is that AI is going to solve everything.
Okay.
It is like, a magic wand, you bring AI and, you have everything, you have answers to it. No, that's not the case, right? I think that is probably the biggest misconception. I think, it is where it is usable, is something where you want to apply it. You don't want to necessarily force fit AI into solving every problem. So it's not about trying to go find a that put this and force fit to solving every problem you have. I think you need to figure out in terms of where does it make sense. How do I apply it, and where does it make sense for me to apply, and how does it result, or what results, what outcomes do come out of our ability to be able to use, if you use the AI just for the sake of doing it, and it lengthens a process, what is the point of actually doing it, right? So I think it's really about being able to go through that motion, and then being able to understand that it's not a magic wand. It's not going to really solve all problems that you have. So pick and choose where you want it to be.
So, what is your vision with Pegasystems India?
Pegasystems India is, it's been a fantastic journey for us, and then we hit, here in Hyderabad, we set up the center to start with, I think in 2007. So we've been around for a long time, and more than one third of the company is actually here. Close to 40% of the company is located in India, and so we are a big integral part of the company, for that matter, and a very highly matured GCC. So we have incredible talent in what we do. Our vision from a Pega India perspective is really to become a critical business driver it's not about just product. It's not about just innovation. It is not just about any one thing. It's about actually being a critical business driver for the company. I think that's the vision. If you zoom back and look at it, from my vision perspective, that's what I would want. I would want our India Center to be. And of course, along with that, we want it to be a great place for our employees to work for, right? And those are the two big parts of the vision, if you will, in what we do. We are a microcosm of the company, here in the sense that we have a very large presence of our product engineering, the product development, product management team, what have you, the entire end-to-end, from an engineering perspective. We have our product support, we have our, Pega consulting team, what have you. So, that is great, from ability to be able to have that, have that spread as far as a microcosm of Pega. The other cool thing is that we actually have a huge ecosystem in India, where the ecosystem is actually made up of our partners in terms of having Pega practices. There we have tens of thousands of Pega developers within the country. More than 50% of the world's Pega developers actually live in India.
Oh, wow.
So it's a huge ecosystem for us, to focus on. Not only that, but also a lot of our large enterprises, customers whom we work with globally, they have their own, centers, R&D centers actually in India. And, that's not a surprise. But what's also a good thing is that they actually have their own Pega, COEs here as well. They do their Pega work out of India. So it's fantastic to be able to establish those relationships with our customers in India, so we can actually bring that outside in perspective to our engineering teams. And they love being able to talk to our, engineering teams directly, here in this time zone. You don't get that kind of an opportunity elsewhere in the world, for that matter. So it's phenomenal, and it really helps us to be able to build the right solutions, for our customers. So to that end, that's kind of what I focus on from a Pega perspective. Our India vision is to be that critical business driver and having a great place to work. And I think it's from everything we hear, it's a fantastic opportunity for us, and it's a great place.
It surely sounds like one.
Yeah.
Low-code platforms are usually seen as ways to speed up processes, but you've you said that they can be used for much more than that. So how is Pega utilizing low-code platforms internally?
Oh, internal, right. Yeah. One thing is actually in multiple different ways, actually. I think we leverage it to the fullest extent possible. I would probably say in terms of our, fundamental platform, that is essentially what we refer to as an AI-driven, low-code platform, its name is called Pega Infinity. And that's the platform that we use. We use it in multiple ways. First, one of the things we do is we ourselves actually build certain applications on top of the platform that we go to market with. Let's say, for example, customer service. We build a CRM suite of tools on top of our platform, and offer it to our customers in the market. We build something called as customer decision hub, which gives, it's an application built on top of our platform again, that again actually really, uses the AI-driven decisioning capability that I talked about earlier, and offers the ability to be able to, for our customers to interact with their end users and clients, to hyper-personalized communications. What they, from a marketing perspective, what they offer to them, right? All of those kind of applications. There are multiple other industry-specific applications, whether it is healthcare, financial services, and other applications that we build. That is one set of things that we build on top of our applications. Just like some of our customers who actually take our platform and build applications on top of it, we do that as well, and offer it to market. One. Second is we also use it for our internal applications for that matter. When I say internal, like for example, a great example is our entire engineering, project management, and release management is actually all done on an application that we built on our platform, internally built on our platform. A lot of our employee self-service stuff is actually built on our platform. We, integrate it with our own, people, information, sources to provide employees in terms of their self-service capability. Let's say, for example, IT tickets. We actually have built our own, ITSM, application on top of our platform that is used internally for people to raise IT, issues and how it gets solved. So we drink a lot of our own, Kool-Aid, so to say, because we want, all of our, applications, all of the, problems that we can actually solve leveraging our, our platform. We do that internally, and we adopt the platform's latest releases before we actually ship it to the customer. So, a lot of people talk about, tasting your own dog food or what have you, and making sure that our, products are hardened enough for our customers to use. And so we leverage that, heavily in terms of from an internal usage point of view.
So you completely took the best use capability of that low-code platform and made sure it is truly, truly robust.
Yeah, I mean, it is our commitment to our customers, right? If it is good enough for our, customers, it has to be good enough for us to use it. Only, but that's how we also look at being able to harden our products, to the quality levels, to make sure that, things work the way it is supposed to work, when our customers actually start using it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
The university adoption program at Pegasystems is a great example of workforce empowerment.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how it started and how it's
Sure.
going? What's the vision for it?
Yeah. It is really a great program. I think in the industry, it is something that we hear a lot of good things about. I spoke about the ecosystem that we have, right? The Pega ecosystem within India, with more than 50% of the world's developers being here, is a fantastic, ground for us to build that ecosystem. See, when you think about a platform, right? It's not just about building the platform. You have to actually think about the ecosystem. You have to build that ecosystem. It's not just about being able to build APIs, being able to build any one, part of the ecosystem. You have to think about in terms of how do you open your architecture, how do you leverage, others to be able to build on, on top of what you do as a platform. How do you look at them solving problems that you don't have the ability or capability or capacity to solve the problems, and then how do you build that ecosystem of the workforce empowerment as you talked about. So we have been running this for more than a decade now. The university program, we have relationships with approximately about, I believe, about 23 different universities in India, predominantly in the South India part of it where we are located, and especially more so in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, as well as in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, in these areas. We have relationships with various universities where we produce approximately at least a couple of thousand people coming out every year who are at least, Pega certified, in the sense that they have two certifications from Pega. We call them, Pega certifications in terms of what that they go through the first two levels of certification. Before they graduate, they actually are certified. So the idea is that you have students who are trained enough in our technology, who can actually come into the industry having already been trained. That saves a lot of the time for the industry, for that matter, to be able to absorb and don't have to really, go through that whole aspect of getting people ready, with the right skill set. So we try to do that as much as possible for the ecosystem. Predominantly, the students that go through this kind of program, that we invest in do come out of their education programs and get their jobs in one of our partner locations or our customer locations or with ourselves for that matter. So across the board, that's really what we look to kind of encourage within the ecosystem and build that ecosystem. So we try to infuse that talent to manage the workforce requirements, that is there as much as we can. There is never enough, of that in the in the ecosystem. So we continue to develop that ecosystem through that program. So it's been a fantastic program for us.
Looking back at your impressive 30 years of career, was there any belief about technology or leadership that you held a long time ago and that has evolved today?
Oh, certainly. There are probably a lot of things, right, that has evolved, from that point of view. In my earlier career, probably I always wanted to be the smart, person in the room. Right? I believed that if you are a leader, you had to have all the answers. That people came to you for the answers, and you had all the answers. You had to be, whether it is technical, whether it is business, whether it is whatever this thing, and you had to be the person to answer everything. And I think that has changed over time. I think that's one of the things that I would actually share with other leaders, is that fact that you don't really have to be the smartest person in the room, but you have to be the person who can ask the right questions. And I think the biggest learning for me, was that to change that mindset and let the team, do what they are best at, right? And that is to be able to know the how and be able to execute it, and give them the right environment, build the right culture, in terms of being able to execute on it. And you are actually providing them that kind of an environment where they can actually speak freely, they can ask questions, and you're asking the right questions to the team, giving them the right tools and what have you that they need to execute on. I think that has been the biggest learning for me, or the evolution, from my perspective, right? That's kind of what I would probably share with the leaders, as far as you don't have to be the person that knows everything, right? Often enough, there are a lot of smart people. It is great to be able to see some of the younger generations in terms of how smart they are, and how different they think, for that matter. There is a lot to learn. There isn't a day that goes by probably when we don't learn some of these things, right? And it is great to be able to see some of that generation, as far as how much they can actually contribute to your thinking if you let them. Right? I think that's a key thing to take away, in my opinion.
Thank you
So,
so much. That brings
so
us to the end of this conversation. It has been a real pleasure knowing about your experience and your wisdom and insight. Thank you so much for the clarity that you've given us across all the questions that I've asked you. And thanks a lot for reframing certain opinions or fears that people might have around the way AI is going to function or the way the future of work is going to change. Thank you so much for that. And I also wanted to mention that your optimism and positivity is truly, truly contagious. I believe
thank you.
everyone across this room has felt that.
No, thank you so much. I loved being on the show, and thank you for the opportunity, for me to be here.
Thank you so much for
I
saying yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, your audience will enjoy it as much
I
as I
have
did.
no doubt. I have no doubt.
So thank you for having me. Well, it's
Thank you
been
so
wonderful.
much.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What an insightful conversation. From how AI is changing the way we think and work to why learning never really stops. It's clear that we're in the middle of something big, and it's only just beginning. Conversations like this remind us that the future isn't far away, it's already here. And it's up to us to keep asking the right questions, to keep learning, and stay ready. Thanks for being here, and until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and never stop believing in your potential.